Donald Trump just boarded Air Force One. Destination, Beijing. He lands in 9 days. And if you think this is just another diplomatic photo opportunity, you have not seen what China quietly signed into law 6 weeks ago. 2 decrees that have already changed the legal ground under every American company operating in China, effective immediately with zero warning. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what those laws mean for your money, your supply chains, and America's technological future, and why the financial media is almost entirely missing the real story. If that matters to you, subscribe right now and hit the bell, because we update this analysis every single day. Let's start where the mainstream narrative always gets it wrong. The assumption that what's about to happen in Beijing on May 14th and 15th is a negotiation between 2 equals. It is not. And the data makes that brutally clear. The U.S. runs a $295 billion trade deficit with China, the largest bilateral deficit America carries with any country on Earth. American companies have over $250 billion in direct investment inside China. Apple generates roughly 20% of its global revenue there. Boeing has tens of billions in outstanding aircraft orders from Chinese airlines that Beijing has deliberately stalled as a pressure instrument. And China controls approximately 90% of global rare earth processing capacity, the materials inside every semiconductor, every electric vehicle battery, every missile guidance system, and every AI chip powering the American economy. Xi Jinping did not arrive at this summit by accident. He has spent the past 18 months identifying every single choke point in the U.S.-China relationship and turning each one into a weapon. The Busousan meeting in October 2025 proved the strategy works. China paused rare earth export controls, agreed to soybean purchases, and made fentanyl commitments. Washington cut tariffs and signaled loosening of restrictions on advanced chip sales. Piper Sandler analysts called it directly. Beijing got the better of that deal. Wolf Research told clients that China successfully used rare earth controls and a soybean embargo to force Washington to lower tariffs. That is where the negotiating table sits when Trump touches down in 9 days. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Trump walks into Beijing with real leverage, or is he walking into a trap? Tell me below, because the answer is more complicated than either side is admitting. Here is the piece of the story that almost nobody in financial media has connected loudly enough to this summit. On April 7, 2026, exactly 6 weeks before Air Force One lands in Beijing, China's State Council published Decree 834, the regulations on industrial and supply chain security. It took effect the same day. No transition period, no grace period, no warning. This regulation does something that has never existed in Chinese law before. It elevates supply chain decisions made by foreign companies into matters of national security. In plain terms, if a U.S. company operating in China conducts an ESG audit, a forced labor compliance review, or a supply chain due diligence check, the kind required by U.S. federal law, that activity can now be classified by Chinese regulators as a violation of Chinese national security law. Article 13 of Decree 834 explicitly prohibits information collection within China that, quote, violates state provisions. The language is deliberately vague. It gives regulators maximum interpretive room. Every American multinational, Apple, General Motors, Boeing, every retailer sourcing from Chinese factories, now operates in a framework where complying with U.S. law can simultaneously put them in violation of Chinese law. That is not a theoretical risk. That is the current legal reality as of April 7, 2026. And that legal trap was already active before a single word of summit diplomacy was spoken. Stay with me, because what came 6 days later is where this stops being a corporate compliance problem and becomes a direct personal threat to individual Americans. 6 days after Decree 834, on April 13th, China signed Decree 835, the regulations on countering foreign improper extraterritorial jurisdiction, also immediate effect. This one formally codifies what legal experts are calling a malicious entity list, a new designation tool that goes further than anything China has used before. Entities placed on this list face asset freezes, entry bans, cancellation of work and residency permits, prohibition on all transactions with Chinese entities, and restrictions on data transfers. But here is the critical distinction from everything that came before. Article 12 of Decree 835 introduces the possibility of criminal liability for individuals, not just companies, but individual managers, individual executives, Americans working inside China for U.S. multinationals. The standard for designation is whether an entity promotes or participates in implementing foreign measures that China considers improper extraterritorial jurisdiction. In plain language, if your company complies with a U.S. sanction, follows a U.S. export control law, or cuts ties with a Chinese supplier because U.S. law requires it, China can now designate you personally as a malicious actor. To understand how serious Beijing is about enforcement, China's unreliable entity list went from 3 designations in 2024 to 67 in 2025. The machinery is already running. Decree 835 just gave it criminal teeth. And both of these laws remain fully in force regardless of whatever diplomatic language emerges from the May 14th summit. A presidential handshake does not rewrite legally enacted regulations. Before we get to the third pressure point, the one that most directly hits your investment portfolio, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because we're tracking every development out of Beijing in real time, every day. Now connect all of this to the most financially consequential variable of the entire summit, semiconductors, and specifically what Trump may be pressured to concede on Nvidia chip exports in exchange for rare earth supply guarantees. China's 15th five-year plan, finalized just before the Busousan meeting, sets self-reliance in advanced science and technology as its explicit top national priority for 2026 through 2030. Beijing's stated demand going into May 14th is access to advanced AI chips. At Busousan, Trump said of Nvidia chip exports, "It's really between China and Nvidia, but we're sort of the arbitrator." Every serious analyst who studied that statement read the same signal, a potential loosening of semiconductor export restrictions to China. In January 2026, the administration revised Commerce Department licensing to allow certain H200 AI processors to reach approved Chinese commercial customers. Nvidia's Jensen Huang has pressed aggressively for further loosening. The commercial logic is straightforward. China is an enormous market. The strategic logic running in the opposite direction is equally clear. Advanced AI chips are the most consequential instrument in the technological competition between the United States and China for the next 3 decades. Giving China meaningful access to H200 class or Blackwell class processing is not a trade concession. It is a permanent strategic transfer. Beijing knows it. And Beijing is going to push hard in that room on May 14th to make it permanent and to expand it to chip classes that were deliberately excluded from earlier discussions. Here is the financial reality underneath all of this. China's general licenses covering rare earth exports, gallium, germanium, antimony, graphite, can be revoked at any time. Today's supply relief can vanish within 24 hours of any policy reversal. Beijing structured the Busousan agreement to keep maximum flexibility for itself while extracting concrete, lasting concessions from Washington. Former U.S. Ambassador Nicholas Burns described the current state as an uneasy truce in a still simmering trade war. Piper Sandler's Andy Lear told clients directly that Beijing made the same promises on soybeans and fentanyl during Trump's first term and failed to fully deliver, concluding it is doubtful Trump received anything structural in return for lowering tariffs. Brookings analysts, studying 4 separate U.S.-China truces negotiated across Geneva, London, Madrid, and Busousan in a single year, described the cumulative result in one phrase: more commotion than motion. Atlantic Council senior fellow Melanie Hart was the most direct. There is no indication the U.S. side brings the same strategic clarity to these negotiations that Beijing does. China knows exactly what it wants from May 14th and has known for months. 3 specific financial consequences flow from whatever agreement emerges. First, rare earth supply chain risk is structural and permanent. Domestic U.S. processing capacity, which Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has initiated, takes years to scale, and until it exists, every American defense contractor and technology company is operating on a foundation Beijing can destabilize overnight. Second, if Nvidia chip access is meaningfully expanded as part of a Beijing deal, markets may react positively in the short term, but the medium-term consequence, Chinese AI capability accelerating because of American hardware, carries competitive and national security costs that markets will not price correctly for years. Third, Decree 834 and Decree 835 remain active law. Every U.S. multinational operating in China is still caught between conflicting legal systems. That compliance trap is not resolved by summit diplomacy. It requires detailed regulatory negotiation at a level that head of state meetings do not produce. Xi Jinping has also pre-scheduled the entire arc of 2026. Trump visits Beijing in May. Xi potentially attends the G20 in December. Beijing has structured a calendar that gives China maximum time to extract concessions at every stage while controlling the staging and optics of every interaction. Brookings scholar Patricia Kim put the underlying dynamic precisely. The United States and China each hold chokehold positions over critical sectors of the global economy, and neither side is prepared to relinquish them. The Beijing summit on May 14th is not a ceremony. The financial stakes are already embedded in your supply chains, your investment portfolio, and the technology infrastructure your economy runs on. Decree 834, Decree 835, revocable rare earth licenses, semiconductor access traded for strategic concessions. A handshake in public does not rewrite the fine print, and the fine print is exactly where the money either stays safe or quietly moves away from the American side of the table. If this gave you something your financial news feed skipped entirely, share it with someone who still thinks Beijing is just diplomacy. It is not. It is the most consequential financial negotiation of 2026, and you needed to understand it before May 14th. If you want this level of analysis every single day, with no noise and no spin, subscribe. It takes 1 second, and it means you will never be behind on what actually matters.